Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my phantom thoughts. In this episode, I have calls from Daniel of the Bandits Keep podcast, Riley of the Diegetic Advancement podcast, Mirke of the Meek podcast, and Jason, formerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, and hopefully future of the Nerds RPG Variety Podcast, as he sees fit. And then I ramble on a little bit about inconsistent podcasting, and then we get a little more dungeon delving in Tales of the Dragon Slayers. So let's get to it.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Daniel from Bandits Keep calling in. I'm not quite done. I'm probably a third of the way through your latest episode, but I'm going to have to stop listening in a second, and I want to remember to call in, as I sometimes forget. I think I see where you're going with this, and I agree with you. I think that having, and in fact I've said this before, one reason why I think that the basic book, or BX as it would be, is the best way to learn D&D is exactly some of the things you're saying. Not only do they have examples of play, which I think are super important, they have a starter adventure that you can finish yourself and a process for building adventures, including different themes, how you can do them, etc., etc. So I do think that's accurate, right? I think that one of the failings, I use the word failings because that seems so negative, but that's the first word I can think of something like OSE, which is such a beautiful rendition, if you will, of BX, is that they essentially say at the beginning, we're not here to teach you how to play the game. Go watch some videos of people playing D&D. And I feel like that's probably the worst way to learn how to play D&D, I'm sorry to say. As much as I've done many actual play videos, I don't think that really gives you a sense as much as seeing it in print, seeing a process, seeing it written down, and literally seeing an example of play. So, yeah, I think that's interesting. You're talking about now that there's a big adventure in one of the books that you got that was basically about equipment. So I'm going to try to listen to the rest of that. And if I have anything else to say, I will call back in. Been enjoying the show. I really like the last Dragon Slayers, where you kind of went through and gave almost like a history of what had been happening and where everybody's at. I thought that was really cool to see the scope of what's been happening through this campaign. Really enjoying that. I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Riley here. Really interesting question that you've posed at the start of your latest podcast. I think there's a lot of new games, especially in like the OSR sphere, where they're really relying on what's come before for things like examples of play, GM player guidelines, and adventures. OSE is a good example. You need to go back to the original to kind of work out how it's played. I'm not sure it's really the best rule set for someone just starting who doesn't know what D&D is. The rules are really clear, but what do you do in the game? And so I think that is really important to include, and it would be better if more games did it. Obviously, for something like OSE, yeah, you can just pick up BX, but there's new games that are trying to do something different, and it's a really great window into what type of games this game is kind of made to play. Things like adventure generation or content generation tables and adventures are a really great way to do that. You could look at DCC, for example, and kind of figure out it's weird, but you read an adventure, you know how weird it's meant to be, kind of thing. Anyway.
Thank you, Daniel and Riley. I think that including some kind of example adventure or an adventure to play through, or just samples of what an adventure should look like, are something that more games should have, particularly if you're looking to bring new players into your game in addition to attracting players, say, that already have knowledge of RPGs. Because the genre you're trying to emulate, the type of game you're trying to play, how involved is the combat, do you have a skill system, particularly the parts of the game that are going to involve, a systemic approach where there are dice thrown, or there are cards drawn, or there are numbers picked out of a hat, or maybe the players are just choosing to use a particular resource or skill that diminishes with use. Knowing how to build encounters to effectively use that system without, overwhelming the player or underwhelming, not providing enough of a challenge. Those are the things we talk about in the RPG world all the time. Balance is a word that is used, and a lot of people don't like that word because they say things shouldn't be balanced. But every game, every RPG is balanced in a way. It may not be systemically balanced. It may be balanced in how you play it. It may be balanced in, okay, there are going to be times when players are not up to facing a challenge, or they're not up to fighting a particular type of creature. They'll have to sneak around it or negotiate with it or otherwise avoid it, or just come back later and deal with it when they've gotten stronger. But communicating that is in itself part of the adventure. It's part of playing the game. And that's something that the game master or the referee, however you prefer to refer to it, needs to know how to do. And if you're utilizing a system that is not as common, then you're more likely to need the example to go with. And this may be as simple as including a few examples in the GM section of your book. It doesn't necessarily have to be a full adventure, but having a full starter adventure in there can give a taste of what a party should face, a group of players should face when they're starting the game, and also give advice of how to prepare like-kind encounters in the future, and maybe more complex or more difficult encounters as the player characters develop to the game master. And, the more innovative you're making your system, or the more you're getting away from the traditional D20 system that a lot of people think about when they think about role-playing games, because of the popularity of D&D and of Pathfinder, the more likely you are to need to give guidance. And it is something I don't hear a lot about. I hear people asking for settings, maybe, for that kind of material to put in, or for random tables to roll on, themed random tables. This one's themed for the dungeon. This one's themed for the wilderness. This one's themed for a high medieval campaign. This one's themed for a low magic campaign. Those are the things I see a lot that's being put out. And that's not necessarily, that's going to give you material to put in a game, but not necessarily going to tell you how to structure the game. So thank you again for your calls and for your input. I always welcome it.
I also wanted to call in on the rules discussion again. Mirke called in, and I've been thinking about it. And I think when I originally called in, I said, rules are written, it's fine, but you're probably going to change things over time to fit yourself, the group, their campaign, and obviously you've got to fill in gaps, which is where sort of the rulings over rules come in. But I think you could run a game, and I think you could call it an RPG, without any rules. If we just said, set the scene, you're adventurers, there's goblins and loot behind them. What do you do? And there's no mechanics, no stats, and it's just up to the GM to adjudicate what you as players describe. I think you could run an RPG. Of course, you could say that it's up to the GM to decide or adjudicate is probably a rule. But if you can get away with that, then are rules important? I still think they do, but I still think they are. But it's an interesting counterpoint. Anyway, keep up the shows. Talk to you later.
Thinking about how important are, rules or specific rules or the rules set makes me think of the idea of improv, where improv is yes and. So you're building on what the next person said or did and then handed off to you. and there's a lot of improvisation, I should say, in role-playing games. And I wonder how much improv you could fit into role-playing games where the players share more in the world building, which is something that is encouraged a lot in RPGs in general, I think, and in the OSR. I know I've seen a lot of OSR spaces, let your players help develop the world. And some of that is specifically having them develop it, ask them questions. Well, what do you see in the tavern? And sometimes it's just playing on responses to what the character's actions are, what that does to the world and what that means for the world. And when you make those rulings, what does that mean for the world? And how far could you take that? How few premises could you start with, and then the players get a lot of input under that sort of yes and system. And I wonder if there's an RPG out there that already does that. I think the microscope world building system is a lot like that, where you have a group of people and they're all getting input into the building of this world, and it's systemized a little bit so that they're constantly building on anything. But I think part of that game, and I've got the book and I've read through it a couple of times, but I don't know it by heart. But you're not looking to tear down or negate what someone else has put in as part of that process. But at some point, even if it's just the starting point, you have to have a foundation to build on. And that would be rules. Even if the rules are just, this is the system we're going to use to develop the game we play, and build rules and rulings and the world on top of that. But then on the flip side of that, if you're in a more OSR old school style that does depend more upon rulings, how far can you push those rulings? How far from the base rules that you've agreed upon to play can you go before you've gone too far away from what you started, or where there's ever more original rulings and ideas than there were rules to start with? And how consistent should you be with that? I think a lot of the input I've seen, a lot of the consensus that I've seen, is that the ruling should be consistent. Once you establish a ruling of a certain thing in the world, it should be that way in the world. But in reading through Muster, which I keep going back to that book, one of the things that author said was that rulings are for that particular session, and they are not necessarily iterative across even the entire campaign that they took place in to begin with. And you don't have to feel saddled with remembering all these rulings, because even if that same situation comes up, you may have some experience that has happened in between that changes what you would have done on the last ruling, so that the new ruling is different. But that kind of a jump could really be just kind of a bridge too far, I guess, for for players in some campaigns, if they're not used to that or even to the idea of that. So I guess to stop the ramble and summarize, and I'm sure I've said this before, the individual rules may not be as important, but having a rule set that you're relying on is important. But as always, I appreciate more ideas and talk on the subject, and I appreciate you calling in.
Hey, Pink Phantom, this is Mirke. I saw your first YouTube video of the chainmail battle that you were going through. I'm just curious how you feel it compares to some of your AD&D battles that you've been doing. Is it a more cohesive system, or a more streamlined system? Better in some ways, worse in other ways? I'm just, curious what you think. Thanks, and take care.
So, chainmail. And for those of you who are just listening to the podcast and don't know, I've been posting videos of a battle in a mass battle miniatures system, if you will. It's youtube.com/@the-pink-phantom. And I've been posting, it's 6 videos, I believe, over the course of the battle. And so that's what Mirke is talking about. I've been posting them in various Discords. And so that's how he got linked in. So it is a mass battle game. It's meant to simulate larger armies, and that's really its strength, I guess, over AD&D, to answer your question, Merc, is that it's meant to handle those large armies. The mass battles, so to speak, that I've covered in my campaign so far have ranged from having around 200 combatants to up over 600 combatants, maybe close to 700 in the one battle, including the horses, because war horses join in after the first round of melee in AD&D. And so those battles have taken several hours, which I've spread out over the course of several days. But, especially the battle with the no coalition versus the mercenaries of the merchant caravan, that was the one that got probably close to 700 men and horses fighting. That was probably tens of hours over a course of a week or so. Versus this chainmail battle, which, even if you factor in the times I paused the phone and wasn't recording to look up something, probably took place in 3 hours-ish, because the videos all combined are a little over, I think, 2.5 hours, and then there were some pauses in there. And in chainmail, in a war game like chainmail, you have figures that represent a certain number of men, and then those figures are organized into units. In chainmail, usually the ratio of men to a figure is 10 to 1 or 20 to 1, so 20 men to one figure. And each of the units I had in that battle had 24 figures, which I had represented with the individual dice. And so you're looking at, each unit was about 480 men to start with. And one side had 7 units, and the other side, I think, had 13 or 14. So all totaled, you're looking, that battle was close, right around 10,000 men, just over, somewhere in there, versus that battle that I used AD&D, that was about 700. It took tens of hours. The one with about 10,000 men in chainmail took about 3 hours to play. And had I had more of the rules internalized, that number would have come down some as well, because a lot of the pausing I did, both that you see in the video and that I paused the video for, was typically to look up rules and figure a couple things out. So streamlining, that's the advantage. The advantage of D&D is each individual is an individual. So, for example, leaders of the various tribes of the Knoll Coalition, the different creatures of the Knoll Coalition, a little different stats, a little higher ability to hit, a little better armor class than your standard orc or hobgoblin or gnoll. And on the mercenary side, they had leaders as well. They were leveled characters, and some of them had individual magic items, which affected their ability to, again, it affected their armor class. It affected their ability to hit other creatures. And for things like morale, the leaders had a better morale than some of the common soldiers around them, whereas in chainmail, I was playing without any kind of leaders or such, so it was sort of an all or nothing morale. Either everybody failed or nobody failed. So you had streamlining versus that more nuanced battle, and the difference was really time. And also, each unit was standardized, whereas some of the units in the mass battles I was using, they had maybe a couple different types of weapons, or 3 different types of weapons if they were several ranks deep, with the creatures on the back line having longer weapons so they could all attack at once. So in chainmail, for a unit, I could roll once for an attack versus rolling for each individual and for each individual type of weapon in the AD&D battle. And both of them were satisfactory in their own way, but it's just different levels of involvement in terms of how much do you have to do to adjudicate one round of battle for 10,000 men versus 700 men. How many dice rolls is it going to take? How many combat tables do you have to look stuff up on, and things like that. Now, that being said, chainmail does have some other parts that would allow you to have leaders and heroes. That's kind of built into. And chainmail was the initial battle system for the D&D line of RPGs. If you go back to OD&D, the first D&D game, they recommend using the chainmail battle system to adjudicate battles. The D20 rolling system that we use now was the alternate combat system that was built into that game system. But chainmail is something I've I've noodled around with before, and it's something that I've been looking at various discords and discussions online, and and I had an idea of just, I looked at the point system one day, found it in this one section of the book, and had an idea for what looks like in terms of points is a balanced battle, but has some really kind of low quality troops versus a few high quality troops. I wanted to see how that played out. So that was why I did that battle. And it's something I may use in the future in the AD&D campaign to do mass battles with, because it doesn't take as much time. You have to standardize the units a little more and figure out how the player characters fit in. That's one of the discussions that I've seen online, is how to make those characters, those hero type characters, fit in to chainmail in a more Dungeons and Dragons AD&D way than just the way it's written, what they call fantasy combat in the chainmail book. Because while there are some connections to the older styles of D&D between using that fantasy combat and the combat that's in D&D, there's a lot of kind of differences to it. So figuring out how those two things interface without losing the individuality that I think you get in an AD&D or a BX or an OD&D using the D20 system, when you switch to a mass combat system where everything gets a little more standardized and a little more the individuality gets kind of crushed out of it. But I think it's something I probably will do in the future, just, to streamline things a little, because I don't think it's going to make necessarily that much more of a difference in the battles. And of course, I could also look at the morale system, how the morale system in chainmail compares to the morale system in AD&D, and a way to kind of square those things up to see if they can match up a little differently, if maybe an alteration is necessary if I decide to use chainmail. So I hope that answered your question. I know I've been going on and on about it a while. I can get to talking about this stuff and just get to rambling on. It's more thoughts occur as I'm talking. And I appreciate the question. I appreciate the call. Thank you. Thank you, Mirke. The Mincer Red Box actually has, I don't know if you'd call it an adventure. I guess it's an adventure. It's kind of a walkthrough. It's, very linear, but it's to help players get to know what the different types of ability scores are about and how things work. And it's very simple. It's almost a choose your own ending adventure, except you roll dice every once in a while. So, but it's just something, like you said, to get people used to the mechanics of the game. And while it might be maybe derided in this day and age for doing the way they did it, it was interesting there for something when no one maybe even really knew what a role-playing game was. It wasn't even an idea in most people's heads to kind of bring that idea to them. But yeah, I appreciate your comments on the idea of having adventures in the rule book. The Dungeon Master's Guide of AD&D has a little adventure in it that is, it's a sample of how an adventure is run. You're watching someone play. So I do think, at the dawn of the hobby, a lot of the creators, the people that we consider the creators of the game, understood that they were going to have to show people exactly what this was and give them ideas of how it could do before turning them loose with the tools they were giving them to do it their own way.
Hey, Pink Phantom, this is Mirke. Thanks for the podcast recommendations for board games. I listened to, I think it's the Dice Tower's most recent episode about managing your time at cons, managing your time and your energy. So I'm looking forward to putting that into practice when I go to ShireCon this year. But mainly calling about having an adventure in your rule book. I think that's a great idea. Having as many examples as possible, I think is good. And I would almost say put the example, maybe not a full-blown adventure, but some kind of example in play at the beginning of your book. So something that people can anchor onto having a vivid picture of what's going on in the game and how to play before jumping into the rules and all the lists and, do this, all the procedure stuff. I think if you've got something in your head that's concrete, then you can easily kind of flesh out the rest of it afterwards. So, yeah, that's good. And then having an adventure that touches on every single main aspect of the game, I think is really good, helping solidify what this system is supposed to do and can do. Makes it a whole lot easier for the game master to be able to play it. Now, I don't think it has to necessarily be text. If you want to reference like YouTube videos or something, as long as they're short enough. I wouldn't want to like link to a 3-hour actual play, but if you can show it somehow, YouTube video, in text, whatever, that's in a concise format, all the better. I'm lazy and I don't like to read as much as I should. That's probably why I do a lot of podcasts, and I definitely do a whole lot more audiobooks than I do actual books. So if I can learn the game without actually having to read the rule book, I'm going to go for that option. But like I said, that's my laziness. But anywho, thank you for the episode, and take care.
And in this next call, Jason points out that some of the old RPGs all came with adventures built in with the rules to give you an example of play and how the creators were anticipating the game would be played, to give an example of the style. And some old school style games do as well. The call breaks up a lot here, but there's a lot of good information here. And I want to thank you, Jason, for calling in, and everybody give it a good, strong listen.
Hey, Jason here. Just listened to episode 98. So, yeah, I don't buy that many new games anymore, to be honest. I'm more interested in the old ones. And when I look at most of the old ones, they have adventures with them. You asked about adventures, and I think adventures are important. Even if you don't run the adventure that comes with the game, the adventure shows you how the designer thinks it'll work. It'll show you the opponents that they think is appropriate and the kind of challenges that they think are appropriate. So I do think adventures are. I just, since I mainly buy older stuff, and I don't see it that much. Pretty much all your TSR box sets all came with adventures in them. Palladium books always had adventures in the back of them. The games that I tended to play, Cyberpunk 2020 came with adventures in it, So the games I tend to play tended to come with adventures. Yeah, so the games I got, the Mythic Edition comes with adventure in it. So those games all come with it. Really important to do so. Games, I know there's a big thing towards rules light, packed, rules that fit the size of a zine. But even like Dungeon Crawl Classics, Ninja City, that first Ninja City came in an adventure with it. So, I mean, you can, and I agree with you. I think and if they're not providing it, then vote with your dollars. Don't back the games. As long as you give people money for something you don't like, they're going to keep making stuff you don't like.
All right, this is going to be a bit of a, I guess, hobby ramble as I'm sitting in my car in a parking lot. So if you hear some motor noises or other noises in the background, that's what it is. Little guerrilla podcasting, as many of the former anchorites refer to it. You may have noticed that the podcast has been a little hit and miss lately, and that's been part of a bigger move in my hobby life, some of it has just been, there's only so much time and there are other things that attract your attention. And as you heard in the conversation, well, not really a conversation, I guess, Bert called in and I responded. I've been doing some work with the mass battle game Chainmail that Gary Gygax was a co-author of back in the 1970s, and getting into that hobby a little more. It's something I've always kind of had, an interest in, a passing interest in, and I've been doing more of it lately, and so that takes away from other things, and some of it has been a lack of organization catching up with me. I take notes good enough to do things, but not necessarily notes good enough to articulate them in a way that would be a blog post or a podcast or video to share with other people. And so a lot of that has caught up with me, because now it's become a situation where there are things I want to do hobby-wise, particularly with the AD&D solo campaign and with Chainmail and with, making a video or making a podcast, and I can't do it because I need to reorganize some things, rewrite some things. And some of that is procrastination. I have a bad habit of procrastination. I've got this, I'll do this later. I'll, put that together later. I'll turn that into a blog post later. I'll turn that into something I can do for my podcast later. And then it gets put in the pile, and then other stuff gets added to the pile. So it hasn't really been necessarily a situation where life has caught up with me in some way, or something else outside of the hobby space has taken that time. But it's a matter of getting things together, getting them organized, figuring out, first of all, what I need to do. And you probably heard a couple of episodes back, Mirke called and asked about the map of the keep of the dungeon that I've been using in my AD&D solo campaign, and that's part of it, figuring out how to put that a little more together, because I was doing it on some like small sheets of paper, of graph paper, and then I put them together in sort of a bigger graph book to try to put it all together, at least level by level. And I'd like to get it digital as well. And then it's one of those things where once you get it in that groove and get to doing it, then updating it is easier than catching up with it. And also, I've reached a spot in the AD&D solo campaign where there's the potential for a lot more diversity of attention, where the party is probably going to be going, some of them are going to be going their separate ways, where there's other groups in the world that are operating that I've said this is an interesting path to follow, and again, I've set that aside, and so I haven't followed up on that. But so it's a tendency of things to change and to get bigger. And so I'm spending a lot of time figuring out how to start. And in some cases, I just have to go, and then if I mess it up, I'll restart. And some of it has to be figuring out, okay, where's this? I need this. Where's this? I need this. And putting it all together, and then I can just go from there. And then, of course, there's the matter of interpreting my own handwriting, which is an entirely different subject. So I don't know how long this process is going to be. I think it's something that when I get to the end of it, it will in itself be kind of self-organized, because if I have the blog posts, if I have the podcasts, if I have, the notes put together instead of scattered around, it makes it easier to hobby and to just pick up and go, which is something I was doing for a long time. I was just picking up and going. And now there's a little more, for lack of a better term, research involved before I can go. And And the other thing is, when I do get to the point where I can pick up and go, and the choice is keep organizing and do this thing, or we can go back to the campaign world, I tend to go back to the campaign world. And then, of course, I filmed a chainmail battle. I've actually filmed another one that I haven't got any of the video organized on, so that's another project on top of project. So it's not a matter of lack of interest. It's not a matter of lack of fun. It's just a matter of there are things that need to be done to continue onward. You're kind of staying in one place. It's kind of like a party of characters resting and relaxing in town for a while after an adventure before they go on their next adventure. We're getting things organized for the next sojourn, the next expedition. And of course, the other question is this part of the podcast that you're listening to now, the part that typically comes between the call-ins and talking and riffing and responding off of those, and the solo AD&D content. Because for a long time, several months, was it six or seven, that was taken up with content from the book Muster. And so that was the habit. It was call-ins, Muster, and then AD&D solo campaign, and then every once in a while fit something else in. And now that's not there. So that structure is different now. And I'm still adapting to that, even though I think it's been maybe 2 months since I've gotten to that spot. So I guess the point of this long ramble is I'm still here. I'm still having fun. I'm still doing my hobby thing. I'm still, interested. I haven't fallen out of favor of all of this, but just the time of documentation has fallen off, or has been spent doing something else other than a podcast, a video, a blog post, what have you. And the other thing has been, there has been a work schedule at the beginning of the year change that has limited more of my listening, and a lot of times I'd get topics and stuff from listening to the other anchorites and the other podcasts. So that's also been, I guess, in the mix. But I think that's lesser than just my general chaotic neutral tendencies with organization. So that's it for this part. I hope you got something out of it. Maybe you understand now why the podcast has been uneven, or heck, maybe it mirrors something that's happened in your own hobby. Who knows? If it has, let me know. I'd love to hear. Thank you. But thank you for listening either way.
And now, more from my solo AD&D RPG campaign, Tales of the Dragon Slayers. The party returns to the upper floor. They go to a 20 by 20 foot room just off where they had encountered the ghasts previously. Here, they had spiked the secret door to the west. They unspike it and proceed into a 30 by 20 foot room with 2 doors exiting to the north, one in the middle and one on the west side. Sitting in the middle of the room, prominently featured on a pedestal, is a small coffer. Bernie finds a poison needle trap in the lock and is able to disarm it. Opening it, they find a map, a scroll, a stone that seems to have magical properties, and what appears to be a black piece of cloth. Unraveling the cloth, it appears to open into a bottomless pit. Not wishing to test the depths or the strength of the magic of this incredible find, the party rolls it back up and stashes it away. Opening the one in the middle, they find a small 10 by 10 foot room loaded with mining equipment. The other door to the north, as they suspected, leads into the large cavern that they had left off exploring before. The cavern is enormous. There is much evidence of mining activity. There still appear to be small veins of materials in the walls. At its longest extent north-south, it is 120 feet. At its longest extent east-west, it is 70 feet. Exploring the cavern, they find a 30-foot wide corridor leading west. It leads 30 feet into a hexagonal room, 30 feet from east to west, and ranging from 30 feet to 50 feet north to south. Bernie dispatches the first ghoul quickly, and after the party is able to evade the paralyzing touch of the other, he then does the other one in as well. Under a pile of mining debris and trash, they find a huge chest, and inside it, a wand and a suit of bronze plate mail. An exploration of the hexagonal room reveals secret doors leading to the northeast and the southwest. Opening the northeast door, the party travels along a 30-foot corridor to what proves to be a one-way door back into another section of the large cavern. The southwest secret door leads into a corridor 20 feet wide, which leads northwest and southeast. Taking the southeast branch, they come to a T, and the corridor expands to 30 feet wide, going now northeast and southwest. Only 20 feet northeast, a large 30-foot one-way door also leads back into the large chamber. The southwest branch leads to a dead end. Returning to the 20-foot section of corridor, the party proceeds northwest from the secret door. The corridor then turns north, then east, then west to east, and then north again. After traveling roughly 200 feet, the party encounters more giant ants, and fortunately are again to send them to their queen. The corridor then takes another east-west turn, and after 20 feet, branches into a 10-foot wide corridor going north, and after another 30 feet, branches to a 10-foot wide corridor going south, with a door to the north opposite. Following the south hall, they travel 30 feet and find a door to the west. Opening the door, Cacio calls out to the party, warning them as she feels some sort of psionic echo. Peeking in, they see the walls covered with yellow mold. After a discussion among themselves, they choose to throw in 2 burning torches to burn up the yellow mold, closing the door and covering their mouths lest any smoke or spores come out. When they finally return to the room, they find ash and sphericals scattered around that Katja believes may be a dormant form of the yellow mold. She takes samples of the ash and many of the sphericals as the rest of the party investigates a chest that they find. In the chest, they find platinum and silver. The only opening out of this chamber leads to the south. The party proceeds 30 feet, and bats come flying out of a cavern ahead. Within the cavern, they discover a refreshing but non-magical pool and more of the giant ants. And the queen's coterie grows larger yet. As the ants leave, the party discovers in bags around the pool electrum and silver. Winding their way out of the cave and back through the room where the yellow mold had been, back to the corridor to the north, they decide to open the northern door they had previously spiked and bypassed. Opening up, they find a small 10 by 10 room with more mining equipment and lab equipment and some samples. Going back west down the 20-foot wide corridor, they take the northern branch they had previously gone by. It goes north 40 feet before turning west a further 50 feet and comes to a T. They decide to go south, since it seems to lead back to a section they had explored earlier and possibly have less to explore in that direction. Going 60 feet south, they encounter another room with a pool in it. This room detects as magic, and as they have been doing since the unfortunate incident with Prier, they choose to bypass experimentation for now, with Katja merely drawing some samples in some test tubes. Searching the 20 by 20 foot room, they find a secret passage to the south in rough-hewn rock. Opening it, they find a swarm of sturges feeding on a couple of bodies. They're able to kill several before the sturges are able to react. In the chaotic battle that follows, Harl and MacLeod are both hit by sturges, but the others are able to knock them off of them before they suffer further injury. The party recovers ore of silver, electrum, and gold, as well as from the two bodies a potion and a cloak that detects his magic. They look around at the abbreviated cave, which is just 10 feet wide by roughly 25 feet wide. There are several abbreviated branches that show signs of attempted mining with broken equipment within. Using a couple of solid pickaxes, so Sven and MacLeod attempt to chip away a little more and discover that the gleaming metal veins are very hard indeed, as they are blunt or break those pickaxes. Another group of ants come in while they are attempting to determine the nature of this cave, and they are able to send them back to the Queen as well. The party then goes north, past the T-junction 30 feet, then turning east 30 feet, where they run into a secret door which opens into yet another cavern. Initially, they are in a small 30 by 20 branch, but it opens up into a much larger 60 by 60 foot cave with a pool in the middle. Quick aside here from Future Phantom, this is the actual magic pool that I mentioned that was back in the cave, back in the room right before the cave with the sturges. I made a mistake in my notes there, but this is the magical pool that they find. With this section of the level explored, the party returns to an underground river they had previously had to bypass. This time, Bernie is able to use some wings of flying to recover the boat on the other side and bring it across the river so they're able to pass. In the hallway, as beginning to explore the hallway beyond, they run into a group of bugbears. The bugbears apparently were not expecting anyone to be able to cross the river, and they are taken by surprise, and the party is able to overwhelm them before they do any damage. At the end of the 40-foot hall, they find a door, which takes several attempts to open. Once they get in, they run into another group of bugbears, alerted to their presence by their attempts to get in. This time, the battle is more even. MacLeod goes down, Bernie takes much injury, but the party is able to overcome the bugbears. They realize that this was essentially the bugbears' home. They find copper, electrum, gold, jewelry, and a sword. Sven is injured by the sword when he attempts to pick it up, as it is of a different alignment. After fully exploring this 30 by 30 foot room, they go through the single door to the north into another 30 by 30 foot room. It is empty save for a door to the north in the northeast corner, but a search reveals another door to the north in the northwest corner. Looking at their map, they believe that the secret door leads to another corridor which leads back to the river that they had seen, a passage that they had seen before but could not pass over, there was no boat moored. They open the secret door and discover that this is the case. Backtracing their steps, they open the other door to the north into an L-shaped cavern. It runs back to the east, roughly 50 feet, being 15 feet wide along the way, and then turns and goes south another 30 feet, being about 20 feet wide that way. They discover yet another magical pool and choose once again not to chance it, other than to take samples. There is much speculation among the party whether the strange ores found within the walls of the caves and caverns have somehow caused the normal water that they have seen in the river to become all these magical pools scattered throughout this area of the hill. With this area of the hill explored, the party returns home after a long day, with MacLeod pondering the luck he has to have such boon companions to help him when he's been most in need. The opening music of this podcast is Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Thank you for listening to Phantom Thoughts. I would love to hear your feedback. You don't have to be part of the show. If you want to contact me and let me know, hey, these are for your eyes only. I just wanted to give you thoughts, ideas, response, and it's really for your eyes or ears only, that's absolutely fine. I'd love to hear from you either way. So just let me know when you contact me. Just, I don't want to be part of the show. There are lots of different ways you can contact me. You can send me an email at phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. And that can be a regular email, or you can attach an audio file to it. You can use the message button on my podcast site on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/phantom thoughts. You can contact me via my Google Voice number, 864-209-1441. You can contact me via SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/phantom thoughts. You can contact me on Discord, The Pink Phantom. All this contact information is listed in the show notes of every episode. And thank you for those who call in. Thank you for those who don't call in. I appreciate you listening and hope you'll listen again next time. Until then, I hope you have a great day.